Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 58 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Co-op Financial Services. Co-op is your trusted payments processing partner whose mission it is to drive the credit union movement forward, and we could not be happy to have them as a sponsor of the podcast. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Rhonda Hotard. Rhonda is the president and CEO of Louisiana Federal Credit Union. I had heard about the work Rhonda and her team were doing at the credit union, just telling stories and finding their why, and I was intrigued and knew I had to get her on the show. And an interesting thing about this conversation, we were both attendees at a Co-op Think event a few years back where Gary Vaynerchuk spoke, not your average credit union keynote speaker, and how much we took, back to our respective organizations. This had nothing to do with Co-op being our sponsor, believe it or not, but that led her to finding Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, and the rest you could say is history. We talk about telling the member story, connecting employees to the why, their why, as well as the why of the credit union, and all kinds of leadership and life hacks that Rhonda picked up along the way. We actually kept sharing stories after we stopped recording, so this conversation was a blast to have. Without further ado, I give you my conversation with Rhonda Hotard. Enjoy. Rhonda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Randy.
And congratulations is in order. We're supposed to record this a week ago, but you didn't have a voice. So congrats to your LSU Tigers.
Go Tigers.
Like we were just talking before we hit record, that had to be quite the week or so for, you said you're native from Louisiana. So
yes, it was an experience. It was an awesome year. Fabulous. They're talking about Coach O, 15-0, and Joe Burrow. Of course, everything ends with EAUX down here.
That is awesome. Well, I was more than happy to reschedule because I can not only imagine if one of my teams won, which hasn't happened. So my guess is I wouldn't have a voice either. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation, doing some homework on you. Looked like there was going to be a lot to talk about. When I was talking to Erin, she was telling me about the work that you've been doing at your credit union to capture the why. And that Simon Sinek book is probably one of the most referenced books on the podcast over the course of the first year. So if you could, can you share with our listeners, what's the motivation behind focusing on the why? And, as an add-on, what's the effect that's had on the credit union?
Yeah, well, we started probably, I'm going to say about 6 or 7 years ago, really trying to determine who we were, what we meant to our members, and how we were being impactful and making a difference. And with that journey, what we found was a lot of times in strategic planning meetings, you'll have a facilitator and they'll ask you questions like, what are you doing different? How do you differentiate yourself from the credit union down the street or the financial institution down the street? And I think that we all sit around the table and we say, it's our member service. We do the best job ever with member service. And we just kind of got tired of really saying that and not really understanding what that really meant. So we wanted to dig a little deeper. Back in 2014, we actually had Co-op had their Think conference in New Orleans. And I required my entire management team to attend because it was in our backyard. It's a relatively low cost. We didn't have to stay overnight. The entire management team went there and we were all sitting on the front row. And there was a speaker that came out by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yep.
Came out and he got on the stage and started talking. And I can tell you that some words came out of his mouth that you don't commonly hear in a credit union conference. He just really blew us away with the things that he had to say. And it was so in your face and so real. And he talked about how we had missed the boat as credit union industry in 2008 with the downfall of the financial market. And that was our opportunity to really get out there and make a difference and talk about who we were. It was just one of those conferences that made you think. So we left the conference and immediately after, I brought the team to a meeting room and I said, while this is all, we're energized about this, let's talk about this. And let's talk about what we need to be doing differently as a credit union to really be impactful. And so what we did was we sat down and we talked about consumer demand and what is it that the consumer is really looking for. And we've never been a credit union that's compared ourselves to the typical peers, the credit unions down the street. We really look at the retail experience and the consumer experience overall. And that's how we gauge and kind of measure success. So from that event, we came up with some acronyms of some things that we thought really made a difference. And that was connection. And it was about connecting to the consumer, connecting to the member in meaningful ways. We talked about choices and how today people have choices. And you are really, at the end of the day, you're an errand on their list on a Friday or a Saturday when they're coming by to make the deposit. They're just running another errand. And how can we really be a choice and make a difference for them? Convenience, that you have to be there when they need you to be there. And credit unions, I think, need to get out of the mindset of saying, well, the member can just come to us. They can come to the branch and get their debit card rekeyed or whatever. And then obviously capital is important. So we went through that exercise. And then about 4 years ago, we started really digging into culture. And what is our culture here? And we went through all of that exercise and we determined what our culture is, which is really about who you are and what's your norms and those types of things. Then we came across Simon Sinek's book, Start with Why. And so it's just like a perfect transition for us as we move through these processes in really kind of doing some deep soul searching on who we are and what we're about and how we can be impactful and make a difference. We went through that exercise and then we went to his next book, which is Find Your Why, which is really the workbook exercise to go through. We brought in a cross section of staff members, people that had been with the credit union for a long time, people that just came. We had front office, we had back office, we had a huge mix. And we went through this exercise. And part of the exercise that you go through when you follow that is you pull your tribe together and you start telling stories. And through the stories is really how you come to your why. So what pulled up with the stories that we were hearing in this exercise was both internal stories and external, which means that it was things that were impactful to our members and things that were impactful to our staff. But our credit union we've gone through some pretty extraordinary events over the last 10, 20 years, starting with Katrina in 2005. We weren't directly impacted, but we were right outside of New Orleans. So we got a lot of the effects, people responding to that, whether it be Red Cross, National Guard. We had all of that going on in our small town. And our credit union was impacted in the way that we helped members, our members and members of credit unions in New Orleans that couldn't get back to a credit union. We had a flood here in our parish in 2012 that basically about 7,000 homes out of 16,000 were flooded. And the way that our credit union responded to that in a time of that disaster. And then also in 2012, we had 4 police officers that were ambushed and 2 were killed and 2 were wounded. And our credit union immediately stepped in. We set up a funding source for those families and just really jumped in. And so in the stories that our staff were telling, part of it was why do you feel so great about coming to work here? And these were the stories that were coming up. And it really was about how we were impacting lives of the people that we serve, whether it be our community or our membership. And so that's how our why came about. We talk a lot to our staff about thinking about your purpose in life, thinking about why you get up and come to work and the difference that you can make. And so pulling all of that together, coming up with our why, which I'll share with you. Our why is simply to help people so they can focus on life first. And we replaced our mission statement, our vision statement. We've gotten rid of all of those things and we only have a why. And so we challenge our staff to live that and to find their why for themselves personally. And when you find that your personal why aligns with your corporate why, it creates such a powerful and fulfilling experience for individuals. The impact that we've seen with that is really twofold. I feel a higher energy level here at the credit union. So like people are very excited about coming here because they know that they're coming, they're going to make a difference and they're going to help people in life. It's empowered our staff. They know that as long as they are living to this why, they don't have to ask the supervisor. or permission to do something, or to reverse a fee on a transaction, or to not charge a member for a statement, because they know that if they're helping that member focus on life first, then that's what they need to do. So it's been very empowering for the staff throughout the organization. The other thing is that we immediately took away cross-selling goals when we came up with this. And we said, once we came up with the why, and we said this is going to be one of our number one priorities strategically, is to really live this why. But we're real big on goals, and we're real big on accountability. And how do you hold the people accountable to live in this why? Because this is almost like an intangible. How do you can feel it, but how do you know that you've done it? At the end of the year, how do you go back and know that we were successful in living the why? And we knew that the whole premise behind the why is really the story. It's not the transaction you're doing with the member, but it's the story behind the transaction. So we decided that storytelling was the best way to capture it. So in 2019, at the beginning of the year, we set a goal throughout the organization. Everybody here, front office, back office, had to submit a certain number of why stories. And we created the method, which gave them opportunity to do that. And so they submit the why story. And some of them, quite honestly, were, very small, menial. I helped somebody carry their bag to the car. But we have some why stories that are so impactful, that really, really touch you and really yank at the heartstrings. And some of them are just about our members coming in and sitting down and crying and talking to someone and not even doing a transaction. So back to the cross-selling, we took that goal, the referral goals out. And what has happened is that our employees are actually cross-selling and referring products and services because they're saying it's helping the members focus on life first. So in doing something that they really should have always been doing, we just changed the way and kind of packaged it in a different way. And their perception of it is that they're helping members, and they really are helping members. It really converted the whole experience for the employee and for the member. So from a measurement standpoint, we had a goal for the year of 3,480 stories to be collected. And at the end of the year, we had 5,922 stories.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There was so many things in that I think my staff at the time was also, they probably got sick of me hearing me talk about Gary V after that Co-op Think conference, because I was there too. So I get the effect he had. And I remember talking to Sam Paxson when she was on the episode 10 about bringing him in, because like you said, not generally the words that we're used to hearing at a credit union conference, but that was kind of shaking things up a bit. And it obviously worked, because I've heard more people talk about that session probably than almost any other. So, one thing that I was really looking forward to asking you is a question that I've really have asked on this podcast throughout the course of the last year, but as a progressive, digitally, focused credit union, is there something that when you look at credit unions as a big picture that we need to fundamentally change to stay relevant in financial services?
Oh, God, Randy, there are so many things that need to be changed. I look around every day and I'm afraid, I'm worried about our industry, because I see so many credit union CEOs that are just continuing to do what they've always done and expecting things to change. And they can't understand why their loan share ratio is at 65% and why they're not able to make loans. And the bottom line, again, is that people have choices, and we're not going to be top of mind if you're not in there, if you're not in the digital space, if you're not really connecting with the consumer where they are. You can't wait for them to come to you. I think that we have to stop thinking the way we've always thought. We need to think about the consumer experience, the buying experience, and we need to get in that space. You have to be easy to do business with. I remember going to the branch a couple of years ago and just walking around, and one of the tellers told me that a member came in to buy a money order and commented that buying a money order from us was like getting a mortgage on their home. That they were thinking that, when are you going to ask me for my blood type and my firstborn child? It's just, we put so many restrictions and so many barriers up to do business with people because in the name of policy, in the name of regulation, procedure, we're afraid of risk, whatever it is. We have to stop that mindset. We have to really make it easy to do business with us, because when you don't, they're going to go where it is easy. And there's just too many options and choices out there.
It's interesting you say that. When I went through DE, it happened to be over a holiday, and we kind of mystery shopped. We were supposed to go to credit unions and banks, but we went, because everything was closed, we went to a payday loan place. But just the ease of service, obviously what they're providing is not great, but it was like how easy it was. And then I think of things like Venmo, right? Like I can pay you right now if I needed to, and you would get it instantly. So yeah, I am with you on that. Last question in this section. If we were to sit down a year from now, what are you most proud of that you and the credit union have accomplished over the next 12 months? If you had to break out that crystal ball.
I think that because right now our primary focus is really on making a difference in our members' lives, that when we look back in a year, we're going to see that we really have made an impactful difference. And what I mean by that is that, if you take the 5,000 to 6,000 stories that we've accumulated in 1 year, and you take those, and each one of those is just a little small nugget of some meaning to someone, and you combine that, you think about the impact that you can have when you look at it from a person's point of view or from a community's point of view. And what we're seeing is that when we do things with our members, and our members they really genuinely feel that we care for them, they go out and they're talking to their friends and they're talking to their family, and they're telling them to come in. And so then they come in, and we capture that story where they're saying, my sister-in-law told me to come see you guys, that you're awesome. And now I really see why. Like, I get it. So I think that in a year when we look back, it's going to be the impact that we've been able to make in so many people's lives. And I also think that moving more into that digital space, which is another big focus for us, we're going to see a huge difference there, because we've got to spread the message of credit unions back to what Gary said in 2008. Here we are 12 years later, and we're just starting to get a national campaign going for credit unions. We should have done that in 2005 so that people would know.
I couldn't agree with you more on this. I ran around the state leagues a few years back speaking, and one of the things that I always talked about was, I'm like, we have to start bragging. We're too nice. We don't talk about ourselves enough and tell the stories of the good that we actually do. I absolutely love this, and we'll link to everything in the show notes that, so everybody can check out what you're doing there, because you speak to me. I love it. I absolutely love this. So I'd like to move into the leadership and the life hacks portion of the show. Like I said, when doing some homework, I saw a CUNA article actually about your military service. So I thank you for that. And also, it sounds like it runs very deep in your family. So I thank your whole family for your service.
Well, thank you.
You've been the president and CEO for quite some time now at the Louisiana Federal Credit Union. What was the path? What inspired you to take that gig?
Well, I'll start with the military service. So I actually joined the Navy when I was 19. I'd gone to college for a couple of years and could not figure out what I wanted to do.
It wasn't credit unions right off the get-go?
No. I did not know what a credit union was.
Right.
So I joined the Navy to see the world, and I got stationed in Kings Bay, Georgia, which is probably as small a town as I had grown up in. I did get to do a little travel, though. I would say that there's a couple of, probably 2 or 3 real big things that I was exposed to and learned when I was in the military that I carried through into my career here. And the first one was that I was in an engineering field. So I was an electrician in the Navy. And as you can imagine, 30 years ago, it was a predominantly male environment. And so I learned real quick that I had to work hard and work harder than my colleagues that were male, just to be able to get the job done. You'd find you go in the shop in the morning, they're passing out assignments, and they would give all the hard physical labor jobs to the guys, and the girls would just, get to go do something easy. And I didn't necessarily like that. I wanted to be treated equally. So that kind of spilled over into the financial services arena, where you find yourself in a boardroom with all males, or you're volunteering because of your credit union position in another boardroom with all males. And so I had to learn that hard work paid off, and sometimes you have to work a little harder to get the attention that you deserve because of the job you're doing. So anyway, that was one of the things that I learned, was just hard work. I learned early on about how powerful and positive diversity and inclusion can be, because in the military, you are surrounded by so many people of diverse backgrounds and different religions and races and ethnicities, and you have to work. Everyone is equal. It takes a collective group to make the team and make the team successful. And so I learned very early on the power of how diversity and inclusion can work to help you. And then I think the other big lesson I got in the military was around leadership. And that was because I was able to experience both really good leadership and really poor leadership. And I took lessons from both and kind of used those in my career at the credit union.
I'm glad that you brought up diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's been something that I've tried to keep front and center on the show. And I think that's such a great message that you just had on the experience in the military, right? Like, everybody's equal if you're at the same rank and in the same job. So it doesn't matter where you're from or who you are. And but then also, you kind of referenced it. My guess is coming from being an electrician in the military and then becoming a CEO of a credit union. A lot of the times there are a lot of men in the room. That's for sure, right? So it's it is. I love that. Very inspiring. Since you've become the CEO, has the inspiration changed for you over the years?
No, not at all. So when I got out of the Navy, I came back, moved back home. I met my husband. Again, it's kind of odd. I joined the Navy to see the world. Got stationed in Georgia. Met a man from Louisiana that grew up 2.5 hours from me. Very similar background. He was in the Marine Corps, and so we got married and moved back home. And I went back to school, finished up my degree and background in accounting, and then I went to a local temporary agency because I got bored. I was sitting at home studying for the CPA exam and decided to go to the temporary agency and get a little part-time job. And they said, there's this little credit union down the street that's hiring. They have this program going with radio phone, which is a cellular phone company. And they were distributing these phones to the membership. And I said, what's a credit union? I had no idea. And so anyway, that's how I ended up here at the credit union. I started as a temp.
Wow.
While I was waiting to take the CPA exam. And then from there, a position opened as an administrative assistant. I took that position. And then another position opened as comptroller. I did that for 6 years. And then the CEO actually resigned and left. And I had left for a short period of time. We kind of call that the dark days. There were some things going on here at the credit union. And then the board chair called me and asked me if I was interested in applying for the CEO position. And my first response was no, because there were a lot of problems and a lot of issues that I knew were going to be kind of hard to rectify and resolve. But I love a good challenge. And so I called him back and said, you know what, if you guys are interested, I'll throw my hat in the ring and we'll see what happens. And so here I am. But I was so excited about the work that needed to be done and what I knew the power of what the credit union could do and how we could impact lives and how much work we have left to be done. And I still wake up every day. And I think a part of the reason why I'm still inspired is because I made a commitment to my staff that I would read every life story. And I have kept that commitment. And so I read those stories and it inspires me every day because I'm reading how they're impacting our members' lives every day. And so every day I read stories and I think, this is what we're here for. This is what we get up for every day. And so that's part of the reason that I stay inspired. And I just know that I feel like every year we accomplish a lot of things, but I still feel like there's so much left to be done. We just never will finish.
Oh, that is beautiful. Speaking of your team, how would you describe your leadership style? Is something that came from the military? Has it changed over time?
I would say that it may be a mix, but for the most part, I would say definitely servant leadership. I am really all about the people. I focus on my staff and my people. I really want to make sure that they are happy and they're taken care of. None of that means that we don't work hard, and none of that means that we do not hold people accountable, because we absolutely do. And part of that I gained from my military experience, just knowing that this is the expectation, being very clear on what that is, and setting the goals and setting deadlines and those kinds of things, and then holding people accountable when you have to. But at the end of the day, it's really about caring for one another and helping people be the best version of themselves.
Absolutely. Is there something that your team at Louisiana FCU has heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Yeah. You may not understand this if you're not from Louisiana, but do you know what a roux is?
A roux.
A roux. A roux.
A roux. I think I'm going to need a little more.
Okay, so a roux is basically the foundation of a gumbo. So it's like what you start when you're making gravy.
Yeah.
The roux. And so if I were in a room with my staff and I said, "You guys are the best," they would all scream "roux ever." And that's kind of a story from a staff meeting that I was talking to them one day and talking about how many times, they say that imitation is the best form of flattery. And we've seen other credit unions maybe try to imitate our colors because we have a very vibrant brand, right?
Yeah.
So they may try to imitate our colors or our uniform patterns or whatever. And so the staff sometimes they get upset. They'll say, they're trying to copy us. And so I'm telling them, people can put paint on the walls and they can wear the same uniforms as us, but they'll never be who we are.
Yep.
And that's because of you. Really, it comes down to you. Our members come in to see you every day. They have a relationship with you because I said, it's like making a gumbo, and everybody makes gumbo a little differently and everybody has different ingredients they use. But the fundamental essence of a gumbo is the roux. And you have to start with the roux. And you guys are the best roux ever.
The best roux.
And that just kind of stuck. And so now I'll see staff members post things on Facebook and they'll put hashtag best roux ever, best roux ever, best roux ever. So.
I love that. And I am a fan of gumbo. So I just obviously don't know how to make it. A question that I added this year was, sometimes as a leader, we have to make decisions that might be unpopular in the short term. How have you cultivated the ability to do that in yourself? You're the CEO, that, it stops with you to make that tough decision.
I think that when you're in a leadership role, you will always have to make decisions that are not always pleasant for everyone. And of course, I've had to do that as well throughout my career. It is never easy, but I think if you focus on that very long term, you really have to keep your eye on what the long-term strategies and goals are and what you're hoping to accomplish. And if these short-term decisions that you're making are really within the best interest for the organization as a whole and a long-term sustainability and success of the organization, then you just have to do it. I think about another book, Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game. I don't know if you've read that yet.
I haven't read that one.
That is really a great book that talks about not using short-term strategies to try to accomplish long-term goals. If you want to be here for the long haul, you really need to think about this whole philosophy of playing an infinite game. You don't know where the end is. You don't know at the end of the day that if you've been successful at life, when you die, were you successful at life or were you a failure at life? I mean, you're dead, right? So it's an interesting thought. And I think that a lot of people should think about making decisions and making plays, so to speak, in this game that's going to get you through all of these short-term cycles and things that you have to go through.
One of my favorite management or leadership books is by the founder of Patagonia. One of the reasons that it's Let My People Go Surfing, but one of the reasons that he has never taken the company public is because their goal is 100-year goal. So it's right. How does this affect well after, him and his wife are gone, like that, but exactly. For the employees so it's an interesting thing that kind of goes along with that. I was really interested to ask you this, when you think back to earlier in your career, is there either a mistake that you've made or that you remember making, or, as you're mentoring other up and comers in leadership that you just see young leaders make over and over again?
I think that probably two things. I think one would be the feeling that you can do everything and you can do it all at once. For young leaders, you come in with a lot of energy and you see everything that needs to happen and you may bite off way more than you can chew and end up failing at all of it. So I think if you stop and you put some thought behind it and maybe really put some strategy into the decisions that you're making, that would be one piece of advice that I give. The other would be you don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers every day. I think that people look at you as a CEO and they think you're always on your game. You always have the answers. You're always on top of everything. And you're not. I mean, you have bad days. You have down days. You have days where you make poor decisions or poor choices. And as long as you can recognize that, learn to look at yourself in the mirror, and also know when you need to make some changes within yourself and then make those changes. I think that it's hard for people sometimes to look at themselves and think about what you could have done differently to help the situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you find yourself going back to over and over throughout your career?
I would say life is short. That's probably one that I've learned more recently over the last 8 or 10 years, that life really is short. And you have to, one of the things that I say often now is it going to matter in 5 years? If it's not going to matter in 5 years, then don't spend more than 5 minutes thinking about it. Sometimes we tend to get caught up or focus on some little things that really, at the end of the day, is not going to matter. And so that would probably be the biggest life lesson that I've learned, is that life is short and you really need to think about the bigger picture things.
Rachel Brose was just recently on the podcast, and she was talking about very similar, where she's like making decisions like, will I remember this decision 1 year from now? You know, that type of, and if I don't, then why am I stressing, about it? So right. I am with you there. One of the things that I noticed in the first season of the podcast was how important mentors were to many of the guests that were on the show. Do you have a mentor that helped shape you as the leader you are today? And, what did you learn from them?
I would say that I've had a couple, and more than a couple, 3 probably. My lifelong mentor would have been my dad. Yeah. And he passed away 8 years ago, but he taught me a lot about leadership. He taught me a lot about being a professional, ethics and morals. Look, he taught me at a very early age, even though I'm a girl. He said, stand up, I'm going to show you how to shake someone's hand, and you always look them in the eye. So those kind of lessons are the lessons that he taught me. And then in my Navy career, I had a master chief that really taught me a lot about leadership and taught me a lot about accountability. And then here at the credit union, my board chair has been my board chair since I was CEO. He actually hired me 20 years ago.
Wow.
He retired from the Army, and then he retired at one of the refineries here locally, and he's an engineer. So very, very smart man. And although he's been my boss for 20 years, he's also been the person that I could call and say, hey, this question's off the record, and I really need some advice on this. I need to know how to handle this. And he has always given me sound advice. And he's told me things sometimes that I needed to hear when I didn't necessarily want to hear it. So he's been a great mentor.
I think a lot of the times that's what those mentors do, right? Is they're not just yes people to us. So we need to sometimes the tough love, right? So a question that I added just recently to the show was like, what does the typical workday look like for Rhonda? Like, take us through a day in the life.
It's our typical day. Wow. Some days I'm back-to-back meetings and just trying to figure out when I'm going to schedule a bathroom break. And then some days I have clear calendar days or clear desk days, and those are the days that I love the most, because I will not be in my office. I will be out and about, generally walking around, talking to people, joking around, cutting up. My staff often say, they'll tell new people when they come in, don't let her come in your office because she's going to sit down. She's going to start telling you stories. And it's usually like when you have 2 things that are due in an hour, she's going to talk to you for a while and then get up and walk out and then step back in and say, hey, when are you going to get that to me?
As a storyteller, I understand where you're coming from. So, there's never a short conversation with me. But before we moved on to the last part of the show, let's take this now outside of the credit union. What are your passions outside of work? What do you do to recharge? What does work-life integration look like to you?
Oh, wow. So outside of work, I spend a lot of time with family and friends, hanging out. I love to be outside. I love to be by the pool, cooking, barbecuing. Always the more the merrier. Everybody's welcome. If you're ever in Louisiana, come stop by.
Stop by.
Yeah. Come on in. I like to work in the yard. I'm also very involved with our local Blue Star Mom chapter. And so Blue Star Moms are mothers of military children. So we do a lot in the Baton Rouge market. And we spend a lot of time helping out veterans, helping out kids that are still active duty. We mail out care packages. We do wreath ceremonies, and we spend a lot of time supporting our Gold Star families as well. So I get a lot of reward from being involved in that activity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's for sure. That is, I'm sure, with your family's background in the military and your own. So that's, I can see why. The last part of the show, we get to have a little bit of fun. It's the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. So what was Rhonda like in high school? And I've added this back in after leaving it out for the first couple episodes, but do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble?
What I was like in high school is a lot like I am now, which is highly competitive. My nickname was Show Off. There wasn't a particular circumstance or event that caused that, but they just called me Show Off because I was always going to be the first one to do it, or, don't dare me not to do it. But oddly enough, I don't really remember. And most people that know me will say, oh, there's no way. You had to have gotten in trouble in high school. I don't really remember getting into any serious trouble. Was always a rule follower. Always liked to do what I was told and follow the rules. I'd push it a little bit to the edge, but I still kind of stayed within the lines.
So we talked about earlier how you found your way into credit unions. Like many of us, we stumbled. But what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I went to college for 2 years and I think I changed my major more than anybody in the world has ever changed their major. I just absolutely could not decide. I was not one of those kids that knew from the time I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old that I wanted to do this or I wanted to do that. I think that I always knew that I wanted to do something impactful.
Okay.
And I think that that's why there was this natural, journey for me to get where I am and then to stay here for so long. I knew I wanted to make a difference, and I knew that I wanted to help people, but I didn't know in what capacity. I did actually start out thinking I wanted to go in the medical field until I realized I couldn't stand the sight of blood or seeing anyone in pain, and I had to change my major.
Any doctors, nurses, I know that there's no way I could ever do their job. So, do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off?
Oh, I have to start with coffee. Usually get coffee and then get back in bed and drink my coffee and grab my phone and start checking all of the credit union news publications, the local news station. I just spend probably about 20 minutes or so kind of seeing what's going on in the world, what's happened since I've been sleeping and what am I going to be facing. Just kind of get that frame of mind of what's this day about to be. And so when I can't do that, it's okay, but that is really how I start every day.
That's how you start the day. You mentioned picking up the phone. Is there an app or a tool that you just couldn't live without? I kind of give the example that I'm reading notes off of Evernote right now. It's where I put everything and know where it is. So,
well, I think like most business professionals, if we did not have our email and calendars, we could not function. So Outlook is
it's
an
Outlook.
Extreme priority. Yes. And the older I get, I find that I am actually relying on reminders a lot more. I used to use notes, but then I would forget to go check the notes.
Yep.
And now I'm using reminders to remind me to go check the notes.
I am. That's funny you say that. I've increased the size of my screen at 45, and I use the reminders. Siri, remind me too all the time.
Yes.
So, the random question: what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
I'm going to tell my age here, but I have two that if I had to say, pick one out of the two, it would be Prince and the Revolution. And the second one would be Michael Jackson, Off the Wall.
Both, you know what? Both of those have been mentioned before. So we all must be around the same age. I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in our home, and that stack keeps growing because of the podcast and the recommendations. But is there a book that you've either gifted to others or you just think everybody should read?
There is a book that I actually received as a gift, and then I have turn gifted to others. And it's not a leadership book and it's not a business book, but it's a life book and more for women and friendships and the power of friendships and how that can help you through. And it's called Annie Freeman's Fabulous Traveling Funeral.
I'm unfamiliar with the book, but I can't wait to look it up. That's awesome.
It's a very short read, but it's a great read about the power of friendship and how important and meaningful that can be in your life.
That is good stuff. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in that one if they haven't read it yet. So as you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question for me, what's become less important?
I think that probably other than time and realizing how valuable that is, that quality relationship is probably more important to me than anything. You know, you go through life and people come and go for different reasons and different seasons. And what you find is that it's really not about the number of people you have around you, but the quality of those who are around you. And I think what I would tell my younger self, something I probably wish I would have learned many years ago, is that it's okay to give yourself a break and it's okay to say no. And it's okay to maybe let go of the things or even the people that are not bringing you joy.
Absolutely. Hey, listeners of the podcast know one of my favorite things is that I've learned to say no. So It's almost one of my favorite answers nowadays. So if it's not it's kind of like that. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no type thing. So there's a question that I don't send. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
Success. Wow. I guess for me, success, maybe I measure a little differently. And that probably stems back to my dad in my life. And one of the important things that he instilled in me is the value of hard work. And so I don't think I would name one successful person. I think for me, it would be all of those who get up every day and go to work and work hard for a number of years in the same career and in the same industry to really follow their passion and do their life's work. I think that's success. That's what success looks like.
It sounds like your dad instilled that in you. So that's, I like hearing a shout out for dad also there. So
yeah.
in the first season, the most popular answer to that question was mom. So anytime people mention dads, I think it's great. So I thank you again, Rhonda, so much for being on the show. The last question that I have for you is, do you have any final thoughts to share or final asks, I guess you could say, for our listeners?
I would just say that if you haven't taken the time to read the book, start with why, and really use that as a mindset, not just entertainment, but as a mindset. You really need to take the time to do that. And if you don't have the time to read the book, go look at the YouTube videos.
Right.
And just pull those up. And they're short 10, 15-minute videos that will make you start thinking about things in a different way. And I think that as credit union professionals and as people of this movement, we need to start thinking in a different way.
I couldn't agree more. We'll link to some of the videos as well in the show notes and everything else that we talked about, the books and everything. So is there a best way for people to reach you if they have additional questions? The LinkedIn, email? What's your preferred method of communication? I
would say LinkedIn or email, either one. You can find me on LinkedIn. My email address is rhotard@louisianafcu.org. And the tricky part is spelling out Louisiana.
It's spelling out the Louisiana there all the way through. Well, thank you again so much for being on the show. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. I really appreciate it. You too.
Before we go, I would once again like to thank Rhonda for taking the time out of her busy schedule, and a big thank you to our sponsor, Co-op Financial Services. Make sure to click on their link in the show notes to see everything they have going on. Maybe register for Think, and you probably end up seeing Rhonda and myself there. Also, if you're looking for your next book recommendation, make sure to check out the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can find a list with links to Amazon of all the guests, not only that Rhonda mentioned in this episode, but every book mentioned on every episode of the show. So happy reading and have a great day.